So, welcome to the Cheltenham Borough Council Audit, Compliance and Governance meeting, held today, 22nd of January. My name is Councillor Adrian Bamford and I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is being recorded by the council for live broadcast on its YouTube channel. If there are any breaks in transmission to the... Oh, yes, that's about right. We'd like to do everything twice here. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until the issues are resolved. There's no members of the public. Can I ask everyone to speak clearly when addressing the meeting and that officers introduce themselves when they speak? Right, item 1, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Willingham and Councillor Lynch. Right, next I'll come on to declarations of interest. I can't imagine anybody has got any interests to declare in any of these items, but now is the time to speak if you have. I'll take that as a negative and we can move on to the minutes. Right. First of all, has anybody got any amendments to those minutes, or are you happy that I sign them off? Right, just one very quick thing from me. On page 13, the council is part of a pilot project relating to hosing and tenancy fraud. I think it's probably housing. A nice mistake to make, though. I can quite see how it happened. And I have signed them off, but just for information, on item 9, Director of Governance and Customer Services said she would take offline a discussion about how we keep track of potential planning enforcement issues, i.e. we set conditions, but how do we monitor them? And at the moment, it would appear that it's only public reporting stuff to us or councillors finding out about it, but whether there could be something that was more proactive. So whether that's appropriate to come back to this group, I'm not really sure, or whether that's something the planning committee, I don't know what you think. Or over even scrutiny, I don't know. Anyway, well, I don't want to lose sight of that because I know it's a big issue for those people that are raising it, and I quite understand why. So if we can just at least note that that's still ongoing. Howdy. I will pass over these signed set of minutes. There we go. Thanks, Bev. Right. Could I get a show of hands to approve the minutes, please? 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. Thank you very much. I presume that's a quorum. Yeah, good. Right. We have received no questions from public or members, so we can move on to item 5, which is the update from the external auditor. Now, we just got a one-page, very brief update, and we'll be considering progress with external audit much more fully in about 4 weeks' time at our extraordinary meeting. So unless anybody's got any pressing questions, I'll move on if that's okay. Chris, Councillor Day, sorry.
Thank you. Maybe this is a question for Paul, because it's more for my education, I think, than anything. Because last week in the FT, I saw an article with the headline, English councils face tripling of audit fees to clear backlog. And I have to be honest, I'd assumed that the auditor negotiated fees with the council, with yourself, and that was the fee. But from what the article was saying, that there's a body, the public sector audit appointments, that organises and sets fees. And according to this article, it set an average increase in fee of 230% for the year 23-24 compared with the previous year. And I just wondered if you could just say something about the fees and how it works.
Okay, so the body PSAA, they for those bodies that opt in, which I must say is around about 97-98% of local authorities, they do a full procurement for the audit contracts, and then they will allocate the specific auditors. So as members will recall, we had Grant Thornton in the previous round, and after this particular procurement exercise, we've been assigned Bishop Fleming. And I think what's come out of that since the last procurements is that audit fees in general have increased. And that predominantly is because of the amount of work associated with PPE, property, plants and equipment, and pensions and the like. And I guess alongside that, the new government are also consulting on what they're calling a local audit strategy. So it's not the rebirth of the Audit Commission, but it's a body that will look not only to see how we can get local authority accounts back on track, but also to see how we simplify those accounts. Because for the amount of time and money that's spent on something like property, plants and equipment, or indeed pensions, which to all intents and purposes we don't have a lot of control over, it's whether that's in the best interest of the taxpayer, us having to jump through all these hoops so that we're complying with FRC and international financial reporting standards. So yes, the fees have increased since the last procurement. For Cheltenham, not 230%, but it was quite a significant increase. And of course, working now with Bishop Fleming, what they're doing, because of the fact that the backstop and the need to have these disclaimed opinions, they're concentrating their effort in the areas which they think will enhance the next year's audit, so that they're not repetition and basically adding costs that won't necessarily add any value.
Yeah, Julian.
Sorry, just to build on that, Paul, the purpose of centralised procurement ordinarily is to leverage volume in order to get value. So if they're not leveraging volume to get value, I don't know any other area where inflation is hundreds of percents. You're saying it's not 230%. If they're not leveraging volume effectively to get value for the taxpayer, shouldn't we question the purpose of centralised procurement?
I think that's a fair question in isolation. In all honesty, if you want an honest opinion from me, in the first round of audit, the fees were just too low to actually do the work that was necessary. And what we then found was happening is that year after year, fee variations were being put in place. So we've got a standard procurement, and then they'd have to do an additional piece of work on, say, pension valuations or something like that. And so the fees would increase. I mean, my recollection is, during the Audit Commission days, we were probably paying about 120,000, and that's what 10 years ago. Under the first procurement, that almost halved. So we all took the savings and thought that's great. We now find ourselves in a position where there's no external auditors. So there was something like almost 1,000 set of accounts that hadn't been audited. Twofold, but one, there's not enough auditors in the system to get through the backlog, and secondly, the resourcing pressures on local authorities through austerity, cuts in funding and post-pandemic. And so ironically, although it's a big increase, we're actually probably finding ourselves back at the levels of what they were 10 years ago. And arguably, what the external auditor has to do has massively increased from what it did 10 years ago, because the local government landscape has changed. I mean, if you just look at Cheltenham in isolation, we've got we've got our standard set of accounts. We've then got to do the collection fund because we're the billing authority for all of the preceptors in respect of council tax and business rates. We also have a housing revenue account. We also own 50% share in an airport. We also have a number of tackle companies. And so therefore we have to have group accounts as well. And, it is quite a complex set of accounts. And I think this whole justification through simplifying audit is actually making the accounts, one, both readable, but secondly, understandable to the armchair auditor that is actually interested in what this council is spending its money on.
Thanks. Any more questions from anybody else? Excellent. Okay. In that case, can we move on to the next item, which is Lucy's item, the Internal Audit Monitoring Report. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual update from the internal audit team. It gives you the final reports of the audits we've concluded since the last meeting of this committee. Tonight you have a health and safety audit. Oh, the screen's just moved, sorry. Health and safety, property and estates health and safety review, which we gave a mid-limited assurance to. And you've got revenues and benefits, of which there were two parts to that audit. So we look at council tax and the national non-domestic rates. And we also look at council tax benefit and council tax support, of which both received a high substantial. You've also got an update on the agreed actions that are currently open for Cheltenham Borough Council. And the other item, Annex C tonight, that I've attached is a very outlined draft plan for a 25-26 audit plan. And this is coming to you as a committee for input and consultation. So if you'd like to, if there's anything you think of, drop me an email and we can include it in future plans. But happy to take any questions on any element of the report, Chair.
Thanks, Lucy. I'll open it to the floor first of all. I've got several questions myself, but Julian, Councillor Took.
Thank you for your report. You're probably aware that I chair the Cabinet Housing Committee, and we've been looking at various audits. So we've had Pennington's, who are a third-party supplier. We've obviously been corresponding with the regulator as well. So my first question, I suppose, is probably a silly question, sorry, is how does this audit fit in with those other audits? My second question is really an observation, which is that this audit is reassuring because in many ways it echoes what the other audits have said. And if it massively disagreed, that will be a worry. One thing I'd like a bit more reassurance on is the actions that will come from this audit. So, for instance, when it comes to the health and safety aspects, the change management that is required to make sure that people put the information in the system so we actually understand health and safety seems to me non-negotiable as a kind of management issue, a people management issue. And it would be great if this report could be the impetus or the catalyst to make sure that people just put the stuff in the system in the required way. Just to be clear with that.
Health and safety audit, aren't we? And this was based on just Cheltenham Borough Council properties. We didn't include housing properties in this audit, but previously we have looked at the Pennington report and we've looked at the big six that came out of that Pennington report, of which we raised concerns with CBH at that point in time. So I don't know whether you've actually, sorry, whether you've actually seen those reports that we've issued in respect of those big six. So I don't know whether you and I maybe need to have a chat offline at some point and we can pick all this up. Does that sound appropriate, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, in terms of the big six, there's obviously been a bit of a hangover, shall we say, in so much that SWAP used to also do the audit for Cheltenham Borough Homes, and so the audit plan for those will sit in what was the CBH's audit plan. So from 25-26, we will have one audit plan which brings Cheltenham Borough Council and former CBH activity into one plan.
Have I made a really silly schoolboy error? Actually, I don't think it is.
No.
But when you say property here, you don't mean former CBH properties.
This is commercial.
This is only commercial. Okay, sorry, I read property and I read it as all Cheltenham Borough Council property. Okay, good, we all did. Okay, it's not just me. Okay, then it's different then. Then it's different. Okay, thank you. It's good to clarify that.
I think it's worth as a consequence of what was coming out from the housing and given, you know, the focus in terms of health and safety, big six compliance, it was almost imperative that we had the same audit done on the non-housing stock. And as you said, there's a lot in here that resonates with what you're hearing from the housing side. You know, I know, because I know the team, you know, they are checking the water for Legionella, you know, on a weekly basis around the public toilets, the changing room. I know all of that regime is in place. It all comes down to that documentation and you know, ensuring that that's in place. So I think this was a great audit in terms of setting the baseline position, and acknowledgement from the whole team, which I think is reflected in the sort of follow up that, you know, that work needs to be followed through.
Paul, can I make a comment? Is that all right?
Sorry.
Can I? Sorry, it's just to come in as well on you mentioned about follow-up of actions and making sure. We've got a meeting tomorrow, and I know that was something that we've already discussed, Claire and I, as to how we appropriately document that, and you just alluded to it, haven't you, with the 25-26 plan, that how we document those actions internally, so as well as it obviously being done by SWAP, how we do that internally, so everything's in one place. So that's something that we're looking to do to make sure that we're clear on the actions, so then when there is a follow-up, we're all on the same page. Yeah, is that all right? Thank you.
Okay, so just for my clarity then, I think we're all comfortable with the Revs and Bens report here. Can't really get much better than that, I don't think. I'm not. So, and there is one priority 3 action, but I don't think we need to worry about that at this stage. There are 3 priority 2 actions relating to the property and estates H&S. I think we should come on to those in a sec, if that's okay. So that sort of brings us neatly onto the agreed actions. Now, as I understand it then, all those relating to previous CBH audits won't be on here, will they? Is that right?
There are CBH agreed actions that are on the action tracker report that you have at Appendix B.
Right.
And they do show that they are Cheltenham Borough Homes ones.
So that is confusing. So does that mean that Julian wanting to have a look back at the previous issues could do so via this action plan? Yep. Okay. So, well, that's a good start. We can come on to that in a minute then. So that perhaps brings us neatly on to the action plan from page 40 onwards. And on page 41, we've got the 3 actions relating to the property and estates report. I see they've all got a timescale, 31st of January, which is a bit ambitious given that we're nearly there.
I've just read it in the report and it says 31st of January 24, so it can't be right, Chair. So,
Sorry, the action plan says.
Yeah, the report actually says 24, so I will go back and check that tomorrow, but I will drop a line to the committee.
So what I presume then is that we'll sort out the timescale, probably revise the timescale and put up some sort of follow-up actions for the next committee. Would that be appropriate? probably meaning that there's nothing more we need to go into here at the moment, but we're looking for follow-up actions to mediate those issues.
Chair, those agreed actions have now been extended to the 31st of March because the auditor's gone in and already spoken to the service area. So hopefully we'll have a better update in time for the next committee meeting in April.
Okay, but then we do need something in that final column, don't we? Yeah. So, Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just to maybe take us back one stage and then come on to the actions is, it may be from the discussion we've had has kind of answered my question, but when I was reading the report and given the key conclusions and scope limitations on the health and safety stuff, I have to be honest, I was surprised that the arrow was not further towards the red, because when I was reading it, I was thinking, oh my God. And but it's kind of the arrow is very in the middle of limited. And then now I'm wondering, is it because we're talking about documentation and actually we got enough to be satisfied about the activity?
There's plenty of mitigation in place. That it's a bit like a rugby referee. You start with the worst, you're going to get a red card, but then you go through the mitigation and it brings the level up.
And then just one more, sorry, on the sort of the follow-up, the actions, which is, reference APID 4492, I think, where it's got a date, October 2024, emailed HM for update, no response, follow-up email sent 4th of the 10th. Great, thank you.
That's the one line from the bottom on page 40 you're talking about there. Yeah. Okay, so you'll follow that up and we'll have something for our next report. So on the other items, at the top of page 40, we've got two that are now 3 months past their timescale date. That's S106 process, the SIL process, and those two specifically.
Sorry, Chair. Those will be due. What we're waiting for, by the looks of it, from one of those is just some of the evidence so that we can close that off. But we've had confirmation from Tracy Birkinshaw that it's been completed. We just need the evidence so that we can close it off because it's a priority too. But we can get that chased up again.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So fine. If we could just minute that we're looking for completion on that, and if there isn't a completion by the next committee, that there is a revised timescale and a clear notification of how Tracy's going to square that one. On ID 2296 transparency data 23-24. So that's just a question of adding CBH services in. So who's doing that? And why didn't they do it by the end of December, I suppose, is the question.
It's probably one of those things that the team haven't got around to looking at it yet. But again, I can pick that one up tomorrow. Yep.
Finally, from me, that one at the very top, the access to information. We're only a few days away, I guess. Is that still right, or does the head of customer services need a bit longer?
Again, I'll pick that one up again tomorrow, Chair. So I'll have a little list to do first thing when I log on.
Thank Thanks, Lucy. Any more questions for anybody? Okie dokie, let's move on then to item number 7. That is it's for Paul. I thought I was going to hand it over to Victoria, but no, I'm going to hand it over to Paul instead.
Okay, so this particular report is just an update. As members will be aware, we're required to provide an annual governance statement every year, and that forms part of the statement of accounts. And for the period 2023-24, we included 2 areas of focus for the financial year 24-25. Only two areas, but obviously one was fairly significant, which was in respect of the transition of Cheltenham Borough Homes, and the second one related to strategic procurement. So from my perspective, both of those have now been, to all intents and purposes, closed off, but obviously there is a sort of commentary within the report in terms of what's been done there. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, that makes eminent sense to me. I've got no questions, but Ashley, you've got the councillor. Great.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I just wanted to say it's really nice to read a table where stuff is closed out, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that we read is just a lot of sort of ongoing issues. So it's really nice to see, you know, we had a target to recruit a new strategic procurement manager, and we did that, and that's really nice. But I just had a question about the Appendix 2, the first item around the transition of Cheltenham Borough Homes, and how the governance arrangements would be reviewed once they've been in operation for 12 months. Is that 12 months after Cheltenham Borough Homes have been transferred into the council? So is that the 1st of July this year? And does that leave that as sort of an open thing? Or am I misinterpreting that statement? Thanks.
So obviously there's a lot of compliance, and I'm sure the member in front of you could probably answer that question, because obviously he chairs the new housing committee. But I think, like with every committee, you know, it's really important to look at the effectiveness. It's a good plug there for me to say, actually, we're trying to do a self-assessment for the effectiveness of this committee, and I think there's some questionnaires that have been sent round in that.
I sent, did you all get an email last week with the questionnaire on it? So I sent it all to Cheltenham.gov emails. This is the 3rd time that I've sent this all around.
Crikey. I think I'm up to date with my emails. So unless I will have a careful look when I get home. But is that did that go to all of us, or? Okay. Okay. I'm going to have it.
But going back to the question, no, it won't be 12 months from the 1st of July, because that was the TUPE. I would anticipate it being 12 months from the first date that the housing committee first met. So I think we'd probably be looking at November time before we do that sort of review.
It's going back to procurement. So it's great that we now have a new strategic procurement manager. I should say a long time ago, I was trained in procurement by an FT100 company. So I know a little bit about it. So I've got a question about KPIs. We'd expect to see some savings, wouldn't we? Through good strategic procurement and changes of suppliers and better deals and so on. Can you talk through what savings we might see and what KPIs you've set for this person around in delivering value for the taxpayer?
So on the spot, probably not going to be able to answer that question in detail. I think it's one probably for both myself and Victoria to take away and talk about, because, yeah, I mean, you know, clearly whenever you take out any procurement, there's 2 measurements. There's price and there's quality. And some procurements, as you know, I know I'm teaching the committee here stuff that they already know. Some will lend itself to be financially driven, and some will be quality. I mean, the sale of this building is a prime example of this. We could go to the highest bidder and end up with something that actually nobody in the town actually wants to see because the quality wouldn't be there, as an example. So I think it is right to take this probably offline and think what those KPIs and how we can actually measure that performance, both from a financial perspective and a non-financial perspective. But I think this is a really good opportunity, especially now with housing coming back in-house, to get those economies of scale both across the whole portfolio. So not just obviously the housing stock, but also the non-housing stock.
So you're right about those two metrics, procurement, around price and value and quality, which obviously defines value as well. Classically, the more unique the service or the product is, the less you can drive down price because you've got fewer suppliers and you can't make apples and apples comparisons with other suppliers, and there may be no other suppliers. But if something is very standard and there are a number of suppliers, you should be able to drive down price. So I would ask, where we're buying anything which is fairly standard, where there are a range of suppliers, that the procurement manager has a target to drive down price on those things, because procurement should be at its best in driving bargains in those instances.
I can't dispute anything that you've just said there, Councillor. Yep.
Good question and well worthy of debate. Would have helped, Paul, if you'd indicated we were going to have that debate in advance, I think. But you may not have spotted it beforehand, so I'm not. So anyway, it's a good question, and I'm sure one that we can follow up on. So that is item 7. There's no vote required. Are there any other questions on that before we move on to the review of the risk register? No? Good. Okay, so we're now on item 8. And do you want to introduce that, Paul, or is
It's me again, I'm afraid.
Okay.
So I think the vast majority of the detail is in the report itself, but just to summarise, so our top 4 risks currently as they stand are medium-term financial strategy, prioritisation of capital resources, Golden Valley development and leisure and culture venues. Since the last report, there have been 8 new corporate risks added to the register. Those, no surprise, relate to local government reorganisation, the big local, environment agency regulation changes relating to the HRC, recycling in respect of EPR payments, extended producer responsibility payments, waste collection, corporate resource, void properties and devolution. And since the last report, 1 corporate risk has been removed, and this relates to Marketing Cheltenham, as it's now being managed as an operational risk. So again, in the absence of the report author, I'll try to take questions, and if I'm unable to answer them, I will make a commitment to get a written response.
Thanks, Paul. I think this committee should actually work our way through those new risks. That's when we come to the action plan. That's 404 to 410, and also CH7. So we'll tick those off one by one if that's okay. But until we get to those pages from 59 onwards, is there anything on the text of the report that anybody has got any queries on? Excellent. Okay, if we could then go on to pages 59 onwards, which is the actual risk register itself. Apart from those new ones, are there any existing risks that anybody wants to raise this evening? I'll kick off because we've got a change in 385. That's on page 59. The 4th one down. We we've got an increased probability with a very high score. And I suppose I was wondering what has happened in an adverse sense to increase that risk, and what are our, I suppose, what then are our mitigation strategies?
Okay, well, in short, the stock that involves is aging. It's complicated. Obviously, it involves a number of listed buildings, being the pump room and the town hall. But if we look at the leisure centre, you know, that was built, I believe, in the 1970s. It had a major refurb at the beginning of the noughties, and here we are having 2025. I think it's well documented that the track is also end of life. But what comes with those venues is considerable maintenance. I mean, yeah, these are not sort of tens of thousands of pounds to rectify. They're hundreds of thousands or indeed millions. And so I think what probably needs to come forward is a more structured sort of feasibility study in terms of, you know, fit for purpose venues and where the council wants to take the direction in terms of, does it spend significant sums in maintaining and enhancing the existing, or are you potentially at the stage where you need to consider new build?
This may be more appropriate to be taken offline, so please, Chair, or anybody step in. Excuse me, but I was wondering, with this risk, it looks like the actions are future activities, but I was wondering if, because I think it is a real issue, is whether it's worth having, but I'm not sure if, say, internal audit, having a look at the processes and the monitoring to see how robust, in their view, they are. Or perhaps it's actually more appropriate if I go away and suggest to Councillor Joy that this is something for ONS to look at. But I would feel more comfortable if I felt either internal audit or ONS were kind of keeping a second eye, you know, on this, just to make sure that whatever is decided is going to happen and what the process is, the monitoring is something that we all think, you know, will be adequate.
Yeah, and that was part of my reason for raising it, really, because we're all getting older, but ever since I've been a councillor, I found the situation at Leisure At and with the track really scary. Because end of life is an understatement for the track, frankly. You know, it's way past that, and you know, the Leisure At building there are an awful lot of problems there, and you know, we're not the size of council that can comfortably deal with that. So, well, what do you think of Paul's Chris's suggestion, Paul?
Well, I mean, as I said, it all comes down to, you know, we're probably at the point where a feasibility study needs to be done in terms of what's the best course of action. You know, to knock down Leisure At and the Prince of Wales Stadium and do a rebuild, you're probably looking at a 50 to 75 million pound scheme, which I would say is probably beyond the stretch of this council on its own, but in a more joined up response whereby it may be able to get future SIL contributions or Section 106 contributions from not just the developments that are potentially taking place, but in a future Cheltenham sort of plan, then it needs that coordinated approach to ensure that over time, in a structured way, you can obviously manage that. But if this is a piece of work that wants to be looked at, you know, it's a big piece of work, and yeah, scrutiny might be the best place to sanction that.
Feels like it's a bit beyond an internal audit issue, Lucy. How would you feel about it?
I think you're right, Chair. If it was being run as a project, we could sit in on that project and advise that way, but I don't think you're there yet as the council ready to do that. So I think it's probably too early for us.
Okay, it sounds like ONS might be the best route forward, but best of luck finding a solution. Can we move on then to the new risks, or unless anybody wants to discuss any of the existing ones? So if we, then we can, the first one we come across on page 63, the very first one there, the Environment Agency regulation changes relating to the HRC. Now, as I understand that, we've positively decided not to spend the £1 million. Is that it? Have I got that right? In which case, does it actually need to be on the risk register?
I believe at the moment we've got what's deemed to be a prolonged closure.
Yeah.
Whilst obviously council can obviously evaluate the impact of that closure. So I don't think it's a closed risk at the moment.
Okay, but we won't have been able to move it forward by the 28th of February. I mean, we could we effectively parked it. I understand what you're saying because it's a closure, but that's probably, you know, we might evaluate that 6 months down the line, I would have thought. So wouldn't it be best to have the date as something like July or something like that?
I can take an action to review that with Anne. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And then the next three I've got are on page 64, the top of page 64. They're the recycling, waste collection. They're all Karen. They're all down to Karen. Poor old Karen. Again, they're all very quick timescale. And, well, I welcome your thoughts first, and then perhaps we can go into questions. So if you could sort of introduce the three of them, Paul.
Can I just clarify, when we say the timescale, that's just the next review date. So,
Okay.
so it's when by no stretch are we planning to close those risks down by the 28th. It's just that is the next time that the officer will review. Yeah.
So, are members happy that we accept those as three new risks in the form that the score seems appropriate to me, and they clearly need to be on the register? So are we comfortable that those are appropriately introduced to our register? I'll take the nods as approval. In that case, the next one is CH7, which is midway down page 65. And that is about management of void properties. Any thoughts on that, Councillor Took?
So this is obviously something that we're aware of by the Cabinet Housing Committee, and we've also had various conversations about this. This report focuses on the revenue implications of it, the cost implications. There's obviously also an implication that people are on a waiting list, and many of them really want housing. They're waiting for these empty properties to become available. So there's a very human element to it. So all I would say is really kind of echo the conversations had before, that I think this is kind of top of our list. Oh, probably not quite top of our list. It's high up our list in terms of housing, because it's about money in, reduction of cost, but really critically reducing that waiting list. So anything that can be done on that front would ask very strongly.
So I mean, as a housing leadership team, we met today, and and it will come as no surprise that this was heavily on that agenda. So I think it is a top priority. I would probably say stock condition is number one, and this is very closely followed. But I think, certainly some of the feedback that we got from David and Paul, Leo today gives me comfort that, there is going to be progress made in terms of certainly the longer term voids. There's no reason why we can't turn those around a bit quicker. But it's something that we need to keep obviously regularly reviewed and mitigate, because you're right. Yes, there's a cost implication which has an impact on the 30-year HRA business plan, but it's the people element, and that's what's most critical.
I also say, and maybe I don't quite get it, but if this was in the private sector, if it was hotel rooms that weren't being turned round, so they weren't available for new people to rent the hotel room, I think people would be very surprised. You know, so there must be a fix for it. I know it's easy for me to say it, but I don't think a hotel would operate that way. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but
Yeah, we're not turning around the activities of the housing department here tonight, though. So if we could stick to the risk itself, I think what you're saying really is that you'd like a bit more amplification of that risk to include some of the softer issues relating to void properties. Yeah, and I wonder if you're also suggesting that really it's quite a low score as it stands when you compare it with some of the other. And it feels to me, as if what you're saying from a housing perspective, it's actually a very significant risk.
so we're isolating financial risks from human cost, if that makes sense. So in terms of our purpose of a council, as a council, in terms of providing the social housing that we should be providing, that amplifies the financial risks. That's what I'm saying. So that added weight should be given to it for that reason. You might say that's not part of this committee's consideration, but I think it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, it is, and it is part of the risk. And that's why I'm suggesting we perhaps need to redefine it. But I'll let Victoria have a chat. No, or Paul, whatever, whoever.
Yeah, I mean, this one's up for review at the end of this month. And I can see Claire's got the ownership of that one. So it's something that we can sit down and reassess that. And yeah, take into account what you've just said. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add, Paul.
So I think from my perspective, it also links back to procurement, best value, and some of the hoops that we've got. So you're absolutely right in terms of a hotelier. But the reality is, if it was the hotelier, he'd just pick up the phone to whoever is down the road and say, I need a bit of plastering doing, and I need a new carpet, and that's what's missing here. So I think what's going in the progress now is we're now getting those sort of contracts in place in terms of call-off contracts, so that actually it almost becomes that conveyor that actually, as voids come in, then we'll be able to turn them around a lot quickly. And it's about putting that process in place, which is why there's been this delay, and it's all about catch-up. So it is definitely a high priority, and I'll feed that back.
Thanks. I think we've probably done that one to death, haven't we? Yeah, good. That's good. Well, that sounds derogatory. No, I don't mean. I think it was a useful discussion. The last one then I've got of the new ones is 410, which is devolution. I don't. I guess we got to include. Does that one include unitarisation, if that's the right word for it, or is it just about mayoral stuff?
As that's written, I would say it's more about combined authorities. But again, Victoria and I will take that one offline and see whether there's. I think there is a separate one on.
Yeah, I think there is.
Reorganisation.
Where is it? Because I mean that's. Yeah. Okay, that's 408. And that one is up there at 16, and that seems appropriate. That feels quite low, but if it's just the mayoral stuff, well, I can understand why it's where it is. Any thoughts from any members about that, or are you happy with them as they stand? Councillor Davis.
This isn't so much a thought specifically about this point on the risk register,
but more of a sort of overarching point of the whole thing around the fact that we have no control over that. And I understand that a lot of these risks are if something happens to the council and not if the council failed to do something. But I feel like that grouping would maybe be beneficial because, you know, some of the risks are very specific to if the council failed to do this, then this, which is something that we can do something about, or there feels like there's more that we can do about. But for things like the cost of living crisis, that feels like something that's very out of the council's reach. It's sort of a reactionary thing to a wider political climate. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of way. I understand that it's at the minute ranked based on score, but whether or not we could have another form of the report, you know, as you can like filter things in Excel in terms of what we have the most ability to impact, if that makes sense, because this feels very mumble jumbled in the sense that there are some things where there's a very distinct thing we can do to manage the risk, and others where it's just this could happen, which is the point of a risk, but we can't directly do anything about it until it does.
Yeah, thanks. I'll get Paul to comment on the overarching issue of whether you can have things that you've got really little control over on the risk register. Well, I'm sure you've both got some interesting thoughts on that. On specifically on devolution and unitarisation, I wouldn't say we've got no control over that. We will be active participants. Of course, we may be done unto in the end, but we, you know, so we are. So it's not quite in that category of no control whatsoever, in my view.
Sorry, it was more of an overarching comment of the whole report.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of that specific point.
I'll look to my right for that.
Okay, I'll let Victoria come in shortly, because this whole stream of work will obviously come out of Victoria's remit in the not too distant future, and I'm sure she's got lots of ideas in terms of where she'd like to take us all on a journey. But I guess in terms of the risks that we're identifying, I sort of hear the point, but I concur with Adrian that there is a direct impact on the council. If we just take the cost of living, so we recognise that some of our residents are really struggling out there, and if we do nothing, then they could be obviously having impact at school, whether that's not being able to fund, you know, heating bills, school meals, and all the rest of it. You know, from a pure council perspective, if they are our tenants, they might get behind on their rent, might not be able to pay their council tax and all the rest of it. And so it's that recognition, and then through the grant aims that we've got, so for example, the household support fund, being able to direct that money so that we can make a difference. So I do think, even though it's a global, a country issue that's probably been fueled, excuse the pun, by the energy crisis a couple of years ago, it's still systematic in terms of in the system, and obviously the council does have a proactive role to play in trying to mitigate that wherever it can, as I said, whether it's through No Child Behind initiative or the household support fund. Again, I think devolution, yes, it's coming from above in terms of the mandate, but clearly, you know, the risk there is that, you know, if we just sit back and wait to be done to, then that could impact on business as usual. And the fact remains that actually the cost of living crisis, just using that example again, isn't going to go away because devolution has come on board. And so that risk is very much primarily aimed at saying that, you know, we need to continue on the journey that we're going, recognising that there are all these other factors at play. Victoria?
Yeah, I agree with what Paul's just said. I think that there are some things that you would have that are more horizon scanning, so things that we need to be aware of. Off the top of my head, things AI, the sort of how that might look in the future, climate change, and those sort of things that are bigger picture that might not yet specifically impact Cheltenham. But I think that, again, just for the cost of living crisis one, because we're talking, so that one's been referenced, because that links to the corporate strategy, and also there are specific points that impact Cheltenham residents. I think things like that's important to have on the risk register. But I agree that there are some that would probably never make it to the risk register, and that's something that I'm working on in terms of, so we're being a bit more proactive with our risk management, having that on there, and then potentially it makes it onto the risk register. But equally, Anne and I are looking to review how we document risk more generally. So that might be something that if you've got any specific input, I would really welcome, and we can talk about that further. So yeah, if there's anything where you think, oh, that doesn't look quite right, always open to suggestions, and we can perhaps have a meeting or a chat and talk that through more. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a balance, isn't it?
So I just want to clarify, I wasn't saying take any of these risks off. That wasn't my point in the slightest. It's just more about, you know, the things that are in our direct control and the things that have a lot of other moving parts that we possibly have to say, right, okay, well, we've got to speak to this person and these people and this organisation to do anything about this. Whereas it feels there are some that are like, the council is responsible for this and we can do all of this in-house, and the split between what is solely the council's responsibility and what has a lot of impacting variables. That was sort of the distinction I was looking for, not the cost of living crisis isn't a problem.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think what it is that there'll be those actions around, like, so for example, here the risk action is to reduce for a number of them. Well, it might be once you've done that, then you get to the point where you've accepted that risk, and then you consider where it sits on the risk register. So it's about process, isn't it? So totally hear what you're saying, and that will be make sure we're building that into the risk reviewing process. So.
Thank you, Chair. On the devolution point, for me, it would be really helpful with potential disruption to certain services was spelt out a bit more in terms of what the risks might be. So I could posit risks that there might be, like harder to recruit staff, problems with staff retention, staff morale. I'm just making these things up, but these would be very human things that you might expect. So in terms of understanding the risks, it would be helpful if you start to spell those out. And if they are turning into real problems, you know, if we then address those kind of individually and see something a bit more granular, it's a bit too vague for me at the moment.
Feels like that's more the unitarisation than the devolution. The direct impact on staff, for instance. But I take your point. I think that's a very good point. And going back to Ashley's point, I was actually having a discussion with Victoria just before the meeting about slightly different angles to look at risk. It's the health world look at it in a slightly different way, and I'm not saying there's no right or wrong, but there are slightly different ways of looking at these things.
Yeah, well, Julian picks up a really, really good point, because staff recruitment, staff retention, staff morale, you can almost use all of those to fight both arguments. Go early, delay, because the workforce will be split in such a way that some just want the change, get it over and done with, and let's all look at this as an opportunity. And then there will be another part of the workforce that will just compartmentalise this, and it's not happening, and so it's about getting that right balance. I think from Cheltenham's perspective, it's all about the narrative that goes around that. So if we just take housing as an example, so I think a number of our colleagues, are probably feeling, oh my God, we've just been through Chupi once, and now this is happening again. I think we need to spin that around and recognise that actually Cheltenham is one of only two authorities in Gloucestershire that runs and maintains and delivers housing in the county, the other one being Stroud. So dare I say, if ever there was a proposal for an east-west, then actually you'd have one housing provider in both of those. And I would very much see this as an opportunity, not just for those housing staff in Cheltenham, but actually that growth agenda across the bigger and larger part of Gloucestershire, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all communities. So I think some more work needs to be done on this. Clearly, devolution, like many gifts from government, came just before Christmas, and I think we're now sort of finding our way through the treacle and disseminating what it actually means for us. And I think what you'll see over time is a lot more detail coming forward in terms of how this may or may not impact both us as an organisation and obviously our communities.
The cracking idea there from Paul that CBH, as is now, could form the housing provider for a Cheltenham and Cotswolds unitary, perhaps. Right, can we move on to item 9 now, which is the work programme? And we've got this extraordinary meeting coming up on the 25th, and I just wondered if it's an opportunity to do something about what looks like an overly long agenda for the April meeting, and maybe bring 1 or 2 of those items forward. What do you think, Paul?
Well, from my perspective, it is an extraordinary meeting to discuss the statement of accounts. And the statement of accounts in themselves are a meaty document, 100 plus pages. And for some members, it might be the first time that they've seen them in publication. So my recommendation would probably be to leave it as the 1 item agenda and give it the due sort of process that it deserves.
We can, and then we can discuss in February quite how the other 3 meetings, you know, whether some items are deferred, or whether we can take all of those listed for the 30th of April on that date. Right. In that case, if we could move on to any other item the chairman determines to be urgent. We talked about the self-assessment. I think this is probably, yeah, I had that as something I was going to raise, ironically. But it sounds as if progress is being made on it, but I've just missed the progress.
I've sent an email a number of times with a link to the survey, which is for members to complete the self-assessment. And I sent it again on Friday following, because you and Paul had a chat apparently. So you should have all had an email on Friday from me with this self-assessment or the effectiveness review in it.
Well, I'll check obviously on Friday. That might be the case. If it's something that came a few months ago, I may have actually done the survey. Have you had any responses? Right, that's very weird, isn't it?
I definitely.
Right. I don't ignore emails. I really don't, honestly.
But I did get the original one. Wasn't allowed.
I'm sorry, you could, but that was a different survey. That was a stakeholder survey, of which I did get glowing remarks from, because I've seen the results now. Okay, I will look into that. I'll speak to my very nice colleague from IT and see maybe if I've sent the emails wrong.
And so will this tie in with, because Claire was doing something on this, wasn't she? Completing a self-assessment questionnaire. And that'll tie in with that, because I'm aware that we should do that as a committee. So that tackles that one. And the only other one is independent members. Do you think that's something that we should try and take forward?
Well, so as part of the consultation from the local audit strategy, one of the recommendations that's been put out there for consultation is, yes, to have an independent audit committee, and suggesting they should be the chair. So I've actually responded on behalf of this council to that one. I'm not wedded to the fact that an independent member needs to be the chair, because I think that then dissolves the fact that you've all put yourself forward for election, and there is, you know, so without wishing to you know, make anyone blush or anything like that, there are very credible individuals around here that serve a purpose on the audit committee, and I would dare say that we would struggle to get some independent members that have the same qualifications to be on this committee. So I think it is still on the agenda, and something for us to obviously follow up.
Lucy.
Effectiveness survey, because it's part of the SIP for position statement on audit committees, also talks about best practice is having independent persons on a committee. And I would just add that 2 of my councils have independent persons, and they really add to the discussions that the audit committees have.
Well, I'm very wed. I think independent members are a really good idea. I mean, obviously, by an interview process, and you'd have to make sure they were people, clearly. But I think they could add a lot, I can imagine, that scenario. I don't actually think that it's best for them to be the chair. Is that coming from IPFA or?
No, that's part of the consultation coming out from MHCLG.
Well, well, let's progress the independent members, as quickly as we can. But I guess we'll see when they arrive what seems best. But I can't at this point in time think that them being chair is the ideal. Anyway, right. Let's move on then. I've got it. This is for me to read because we're moving on to the exempt items. Here we go. The committee is recommended to approve the following resolution. In accordance with section 100A brackets 4 close brackets of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting. There you go. To discuss the remaining agenda items, as it is likely that in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, if members of the public are present, there will be disclosed to them exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 7, part 1, open brackets 1, close brackets, scheduled, open brackets 12A, close brackets, Local Government Act 1972, namely, paragraph 3, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, open brackets, including the authority holding that information, close brackets. Paragraph 7, information relating to any action taken or to be taken in connection with the prevention, investigation, or prosecution of a crime. Could you show by a vote or a show of hands that you are happy to accept that recommendation?